Ebony Jones, program producer for Kresge Arts in Detroit. My pronouns are she and her, and though we are centering the artist conversations this evening, specifically for the artists, we are welcoming all attendees to stay muted and invite conversation to introduce yourselves, ask questions, and engage with the artist in any way that you see fit in the chat. If you haven't already, please drop your name, pronouns, and a bit about yourself so we can get acquainted with who's who in the room virtually today. Today's artist salons will feature literary artists Tariq Lublin and Jasmine Parks. I want to acknowledge Andrea Ulipoti, who is founder of Wild Projects and a huge component of the production of this program. Andrea will be providing technical support today. So if you come across any tech issues, please chat with her directly. Please note the session today is being recorded. And I also want to acknowledge our director, Christina DeRuse, and the entire staff of Kresge Arts in Detroit for their support of this program. We have two ASL interpreters joining us this evening, Jonathan Webb and Billy Sanders. They will interpret the conversations taking place during this entire event. Without further ado, I'm proud to introduce you to our moderator for the evening, Ryan Patrick Hooper. He is the award-winning host and the producer of Culture Shift on 1019 WDET-FM, Detroit's NPR station. I am so excited to hand it over to you, Ryan.
Thank you very much. I'm excited to be here, and I'm also excited how active the chat is already with people shouting each other out. That's really fantastic. One cool thing about Culture Shift, the show that I work on at WDET, pretty similar to this. We're able to talk to artists from all over the city and give them a platform. So I really appreciate Ebony and the whole Kresge crew for bringing me in to do this. It's really fantastic. As I often say, give all your money to Detroit artists, Michigan artists. Kresge does that. You know, really fantastic to see. And a big part of this will be obviously the conversations that we have with the artists here today. But in the chat, you know, if you have questions as we're going, go ahead and drop them in there. And I can kind of scroll back and see when we get to the Q&A part where we open that up. Because I want to make it as involved for everybody. And if there's something I'm not touching on that you want to touch on, that would be really, really fantastic to hear from you. So we're going to talk to Jasmine Parks in a little bit. But first, we are going to meet Tariq Lublin. And I believe what we're going to do is have Tariq introduce himself and then also segue us into a video that he made to kind of talk a little bit more about what he does in his practice. So take the stage, Tariq. It's great to be speaking with you.
Hey, all. Hope everybody's doing well. Thank you for having me and Jasmine here. Thank you to the Kresge Foundation for awarding us this and letting us have these conversations. I was kind of debating if I wanted to dress exactly like I was in the video, so it looked like I wasn't in a video. But I was in California when I recorded that, and there's significantly less shrubbery available, so I couldn't lie to y'all. But the video, I think, kind of walks through where my head is at in the process when it comes to creating these days. And I'm sure we'll talk more about it in the panel section about how we've moved from, I guess, the work I was doing pre-Kresge to the work I'm doing now. To be honest, a lot of the work is just trying to survive, but I'm trying to put like a positive spin on that. So. Thank you.
Thank you so much for that. Let's go ahead and jump into this video if we can.
Hey y'all, my name is Tariq Lublin. I'm a poet, community organizer, and data engineer. One of the things my work has always been consumed with is this idea of action speaking louder than words, but also recognizing that words are the genesis for action. And what I mean by that is, before we're able to take any kind of action, whether as individuals or as collectives, it's important for us to identify through words where we stand, right? It's an important part of our process to express ourselves, to align with one another, and then to take actions that are truly equitable, truly just, truly arcing towards liberation. And those are things you can't do without communication, without being in community with people and sharing in the thoughts and ideas that help push action into being. But with that said, I think a lot of times we accidentally, whether it's by the nature of digital media or technology or the ways in which we now exchange culture, we sometimes mistake the act of sharing words as the final action, right? So sometimes folks will do something like a land acknowledgement, or they will offer a critique on a racist system and then stop there. And I think for me, what I want us to really focus on through my craft, through any of the things that we pursue, is to find ways to take that next step. For me, I find poetry to be the gateway, the place by which I'm able to access how I think and feel about the world around me, and then distill some kind of narrative that helps inform my decision making, and that decision making informs my actions. But with that said, I don't think the poetry in and of itself is the answer. I think it's a step along the way. And I never want to be somebody who just stops and writes poems all day without actually being in community, without actually being in space with others. I know that's obviously been difficult with the nature of the pandemic, but I do want to speak that out loud to kind of remind myself and remind each of us to find ways to take the art, take this piece, this artifact of communication, and leverage it in a way that helps us connect to actually take actions. One of the things I've always been consumed with as well is the movement of collectives, of communities. A lot of my work centers on my experience as a Palestinian, as a person in a male body, as a person who has different relationships with masculinity, with identity, with peace. And so I think one of the things I've been trying to get at is to really come back to my body, come back to what it means to be in movement, not on a grand and global scale, but on a personal scale. I grew up playing basketball and soccer as a kid. To this day, I break out into dance whenever I'm alone. And lately I've picked up woodworking and gardening. And so for me, I've been really interested in trying to center myself around what's within my reach, what isn't within my grasp. And that's something I've been trying to do more and more every day, more and more every year. I think a lot of times when I was organizing, when I was younger, a lot of the work that we do as Palestinians is we're organizing on this grandiose scale when it comes to policy, when it comes to trying to push some kind of agenda that will help liberate our people abroad. As I got older, in my early 20s, I started to think about, well, what work can I do on the local scale? Like, what work can I do to really make sure that the place around me is safe and secure from the powers that try to undo us? And that means, volunteering at soup kitchens. That means, picking somebody up to take them to an appointment. That means doing the little things that don't really look sexy online. And so that's something I've been really trying to ground myself in, right? Taking these grandiose ideas and trying to implement them on a local scale, and then find ways to be the avatar for others to do the same. It's one thing if we, it's one thing for us to talk a lot about what it means to have a liberated world. It's another thing entirely for us to become the avatars, the bodies that help inspire other bodies to take the actions that we speak. I'm rambling at this point, but I'm thinking a lot about movement. I'm thinking a lot about what I can do within my reach. I've been thinking a lot about ways to step outside of my comfort zone. So I've started writing outdoors. I take my tablet, and my studio has become the space I'm in. And also I want to kind of remind folks that you don't have to be productive. I think for me, I haven't written a brand new poem. Well, until last month, I hadn't written a new poem in a couple years. But I think what I have been doing is taking notes. I've been existing. I've been living in the world around us. And I think in doing so, that offers me the fuel to one day when the moment strikes, to put myself in a position to be better able to capture what it is that I'm trying to say. Right now, I'm not really trying to say anything. I'm trying to listen. That's an act in and of itself, right? The act of listening, the act of being. And so, yeah, I've rambled quite a bit. I didn't really prepare this before I did it. I'm so sorry for doing that, but hopefully y'all can embrace this serendipity with me, embrace this idea of taking actions to the next level, or taking words to the next level of action. And then also just reevaluating the actions, right? It's a feedback loop. At the end of the day, the actions we take have to be unpacked, they have to be discussed, they have to be learned from and grown from. And that requires words, that requires communication. So without further ado, I will close this out with a poem. I'll wait till the airplane above me goes away. But I just want to take a moment to say thank you to everybody who tunes into this. Thank you to the Kresge Foundation and Kresge Arts of Detroit for offering us the opportunity to leverage our work and our time in a way that, I don't know, is conducive to healthy growth. Being able to just connect with others and have these conversations in and of itself is really healing. It's really powerful. And I hope it opens the door for more in the future. I know it's been really difficult with the pandemic and all, but I mean, I'm pretty much ready to be a hermit, to be honest. But I can never truly be a hermit because I would never get to have these conversations with y'all. So anyways, without further ado, I will close this out with a poem. For those who don't know, in the Arab community, especially in Dearborn, a lot of us grow mint leaves behind our home. And so we have a lot of gardens where there's just a nice little package of mint leaves growing up in the backyard, being cute, being ready to be picked. And so, I'll read this poem about the time my mom told me to go get those mint leaves, and I refused, but that's just because I was lazy. Anyways, I have grown since then. I am not 7 years old anymore. So, I go to the backyard to pick mint leaves for my mother. Today, my mouth fell wide when I saw the light slip into the hills and those boys I grew up with did not come back. Or so I hear. Mom would often ask me to gather the mint leaves behind our home, and so I would leave for this nectar. Without it, there's nothing sweet to speak of. I pray that when I am gone, my people speak as sweetly of me as I do of them. I see us often steeped in the land and hope that a shore remains a shore, not a place to become yesterday. The girls have joined the boys now, all of them tucked just beyond the earth, but I know they wouldn't run from their mothers, not without a fight, a chase, a hunt, a honey, a home for the tea to settle, a haven for us to return to. Thanks, y'all.
Really loved that performance. And, Tariq, you said you were rambling. I thought you were very concise. I thought that was a wonderful video. Thank you for sharing that with us. What was the name of that poem?
I go to the backyard to pick mint leaves for my mother.
Really enjoyed that. Now, we're going to talk about a range of things, including you really fairly recently, last year, Literary Arts, Kresge Artist Fellow. But I do want to ask you, you said in that video, using poetry as a way to access how you think and feel about the world. When did you realize that? When did you realize poetry had this power, and when did you kind of fall in love with that?
I think when I was I definitely was coming to it in my late teens, and then I used to go to things like Neutral Zone, which is out in Ann Arbor. Also, I'd seen a couple things from Inside Out, and then I moved to North Carolina, where I was a part of I had just aged out of the North Carolina poetry slam scene for the youth, but I had just entered the Bull City slam team for adults, and I was terrible at the time. I was really afraid of sharing my voice and performing on stages. I'm still kind of afraid of that. But it was at that time when I was around 20 years old, I had founded the collegiate poetry sharing organization, which kind of served the gap between the youth and the adults, called UNC Wordsmiths. And I think at that point, what I wanted to do was, I didn't want to just have another poetry group on campus that just did open mics. I wanted us to be a space where we were actually based in the local camp. It's called the Campus Y. It was the organizing space where a lot of these different student bodies that were dedicated to clean water and housing affordability and combating gentrification were doing all of this work on campus. And so we were based in that space. And what I would love to do was I would take 5 to 10 minutes and carve it out of each open mic and say, hey, this year's or this month's sponsor is Project Dina, which was a group that dealt with combating sexual assault and sexual violence prevention. And so like we would kind of draw people in with the poetry, and then we'd hit them with some information about ways they can get involved immediately, how they could walk right outside the door, sign up to get on the listserv and start doing some things in the community. And so for me, like that was kind of where I first saw poetry as that space to do that. But I mean, poetry in and of itself, especially spoken word, like comes from like African oratory traditions. And that's what we were taught when I was out in North Carolina, as well as, you know, being here from Detroit, which is like, has intense roots with the South. And so, you know, I think it's been interesting being in a space where like, you know, I mean, in a lot of ways spoken word, to be in it, especially as a non-Black person, it's like to be a guest in the house of Blackness and to be very mindful of the tradition and the history of like being an artist, doing things with the art that go beyond just the art itself. We think of like the Harlem Renaissance, we think of people like Langston Hughes. And so I think that was inspiring, but also like being Palestinian and just, I didn't read enough Palestinian poetry and Palestinian literature until I was like in my 20s. And that's like Mahmoud Darwish and like all these artists who, Hassan Kanafani, who is in a lot of ways, like, I'm rambling a little bit, but what I want to kind of pull it back to is I have this advisor, C. Dale Young, who taught me when I was at Warren Wilson in the MFA program. And he was talking about how like in America, they don't fear their poets the way they do in other countries. In other countries, they consider their artists, their writers as terrorists, as people to be feared because of the way they move people. And so I think in America, we have to navigate the commodification of the arts. That's one of the things I really am afraid of. My work just being this thing that people enjoy and like kind of keep on their shelf as opposed to this thing where they can engage with and move forward. And so that's kind of what pushed me to really see poetry as like a distilling factor to move towards action. But also like, I just think a lot about like myself when I used to like maybe write journal entries and things like that. It's one thing to like do something, but if I'm not thinking about what I'm doing and why I'm doing it, then I think I'm just kind of lost. I just think I'm just not centered. And so poetry on the local level helps me center myself, but on a more grand level helps me like center my politics on like how I want to move.
I'm really glad you brought up Mahmoud Darwish and excellent homework for everyone that's here to check out his work. And I Am an Arab, really a powerful piece of poetry that when I was introduced to that really blew me away and opened up a whole different world of poetry that I think, especially in the United States, we get very centered on things that come in from our own backyard, but it opens up quite a global perspective and an important one with the Dearborn community here. You know, it's interesting with Jasmine, who we'll talk to in a little bit here, but also with you, Tariq, that both of you are so connected to poetry and performing, that they work hand in hand. And I love seeing some of the videos of you doing spoken word, performing your poetry. That also seems like that's a big release for you and goes with the idea that you want to bring this from the page to performance. You want poetry to be a starting point, but also action in the community too. So what has that performance piece meant for you?
So Jasmine's definitely a better performer than I am and has, I think, embodies it more naturally than I. So I don't want to take too much of the thunder from her to speak to this. But I think for me, like performing, I was very shy growing up. I was actually the kid who like would eat lunch in a bathroom or avoid eating at all just so that I wouldn't have to be in like social situations. And so like I even have a poem about it, but like eating lunch at top porcelain at lunchtime. And so for me, like the weird thing was you can't win a poetry slam or meet other poets if you're not getting on the stage. And so open mics, poetry slams were like a way for me to kind of, I guess, trial by fire, my ability to be in front of people. And just over time, I got more and more comfortable with it and just learned how to slow down. I think that was the big thing. When you're nervous, you go really fast or really slow. I happened to be really fast. And it was really great because I had people who were like mentoring me and like interested in helping me grow. And the beautiful thing about the poetry on the personal scale was it allowed me to kind of, or at least performing on the personal scale, it kind of helped you get free in a way. That's what kids used to say. I'm still trying to get fully free. Like I'm not really comfortable with my body in certain ways. But being on stages, I think, exposes you to a way of existing that we don't normally do every single day of our lives. And then you're like, oh, that wasn't that bad. But on a more like, you know, activist organizer lens, part of going back to what we talked about a little earlier with regards to like getting people involved with things, it's one thing to like go hand people a poem on a bus and be like, hey, would you like to consider this narrative here? Versus like, I remember I saw like folks like John Sands, a poet based in New York, who was like going on buses like in New York and just starting to like recite poetry. And so when you get to a level of comfort where you're able to just kind of like assertively tell a story and somebody can kind of accept it or not, I think that's, again, that like step closer towards like getting people to hear your perspective. I mean, even with the poetry slam itself, I kind of told people on the DL, not like outright, but I kind of saw poetry as the gimmick. It was like, hey, come to the poetry slam. It's a show. It's really fun. But when they got there, it's like, got you. Time to tell you all these stories that you haven't heard before. Whereas if I just handed them a book, maybe they'll read it. But if they pass by me for 1 minute, decide to stop and listen to some of the poem, that's a more assertive way of expressing oneself. And also what I really love about performance, the ability to kind of get people engaged quickly without having to worry about if they'll ever consider your narrative again.
Yeah, with literary arts, it can be such an isolating practice. So it's really great to see that connection to performance and how you want that community. I do want to ask, you said you hadn't written new poetry in a while, and that you were just really kind of absorbing the world and experiences and taking notes. And I'm sure that will inform plenty of work down the road. But I wonder, did some of that grant help you finally take a breath? Because supporting yourself as a poet can be a difficult thing.
Yeah, I mean, I've been blessed, honestly. I do have a full-time job, and I think that's part of the issue for me. I work the full-time job, and I did a lot more organizing than I did poetry. And so I think at times tricked myself into thinking, oh, well, poetry, and this is kind of what I try to remind myself, like, I don't sometimes put enough value in poetry itself. I'm like, oh, well, the words, but like this like protest we're organizing, or this policy we're crafting, or this grant we're writing for is way more important than the poem. And I think, for a long time, I kind of lost that. I lost myself in the work of the work as opposed to the work of reflection, which I think is where the poetry lies. And so the Kresge Foundation, like giving that grant really allowed me to kind of, even in the application process itself, helped me really distill what it is that I'm doing with my work and why I do it. And also just kind of reminded me of the importance of just, being okay with, I guess, being compensated for your art. I think there was like this weird notion for me where I'm like, this should be free. Like the organizing work I do is fully as a volunteer, but I don't think people should be doing labor and not getting compensated. I'm comfortable doing it because I'm privileged to have the job, and so I donate in that way. But I'm like, people should be paying organizers. People should be paying their poets. I'm blessed to not be in a position where I need that, but the foundation grant really helped because it offered me like a level of leeway where I could kind of explore and just kind of engage with the world in a way where I wasn't worrying about like net bills every day. I wasn't worrying about like, just a lot of things. Like, for example, I was able to kind of settle into a new space. I was able to move out thanks to the grant. I had lived with my parents for like the longest time until the grant. And so that was really integral for me. And so while it doesn't seem like much, like having your own personal space to be able to create and like be in a studio was really helpful. That's part of why I didn't write for so long. I had graduated my program at Warren Wilson, and then I was staying with my parents the whole time. And so it wasn't really easy to kind of write, because my writing process, going back to performance, I speak out loud. I actually like would be in my car, or I would be in the bathroom, like in the shower, or I would be like walking around, and I would just like recite lines and see what sounded good to me. And I would write that down and just keep the feedback loop of myself talking out loud, writing down. When like my brother is like playing video games 10 feet away from me, doesn't really feel as comfortable a space to do that. And so it was nice to kind of get out and be free to write freely. So yeah, the Kresge Foundation grant was great for that, but also just like, it was really validating, to be able to say like, and as much as I want to stress like, whether or not somebody gets a grant doesn't dictate how good the work is. It is nice to be able to like be recognized in that way, because it kind of gives you comfort to be like, oh yeah, I'm on the right track. Like I'm doing something. And also even like if I just like even the Gilda Awards or just being in conversation, going to the workshops to apply in the first place, you get to meet so many cool people. Like one of my favorite memories is like just like showing up to one of the town halls on how to apply with my friend Tommy, who won the grants a couple of years back. And it was just like, I just got to chill with my friend and we got to talk about writing and I got to learn from them. And like, I learned some amazing, beautiful things in like the reading of other people's statements. That in and of itself was so beautiful and powerful to me. So I think embracing the whole process of just like rethinking what it is that we do and how we do it, whether we get the grant or not, has been really helpful too.
Yeah, definitely an important part of the process. I just want to put one more call out there for questions as we try to keep this thing on the rails time-wise. We did receive one question, and I apologize, I can't see who it came from. Ebony, this was a question that you asked, and you said, this question is, do you ever speak on things that you fear may receive backlash? If so, how do you move past that? So talking on sensitive subjects, is that something that you've come up against?
Yeah, I mean, I think the cool thing about being a poet is I can talk about sensitive subjects. Sometimes people don't recognize it right away. They're like they'll see an image or hear an image, and then like 20 minutes after I've already left, they'll be like, "Oh, we said that," and I'm like, "Yeah." But usually, like the sensitive topics aren't that sensitive because, in my opinion, like, you know, if I'm talking about Palestinian rights or like human rights or some of my poems that I don't fully that I used to write back before, they're not in the book, but they're like things I used to do in spoken word scenes and things like that. You know, we're talking about like violence prevention and stuff like that. But I think it becomes sensitive to people who are not sensitive to human rights and just like people being people. But there's definitely some stuff like that I don't feel fully comfortable talking about just because of like the nature of I guess parts of the community I've come from, the ways in which certain things can feel restrictive. And so I'm still grappling with what it is that sensitivity means. Like, for example, it's not really common practice to like be somebody who like it's not really, for example, in the Muslim community, courtship is the way to go about meeting somebody romantically, which is kind of funny to me because my parents are like, "Why you're not married yet?" And I was like, "Well, I'm not supposed to technically go on a date. So like, I don't know which one y'all want." And so when I was in my early 20s, I never talked about the fact that I like would, you know, even have friends that are women. But then as I got older and my parents were like, "We just want you to get married," I started to like have this weird leeway where I was like, "Oh, I can now have friends that are not necessarily my gender, my identity." And so that was something that was interesting. So that's sensitive in a less like dramatic way. It's more sensitive to my family. But, you know, being Palestinian, I mean, I remember one time I was 20, I went to a festival and I was reading a poem about wanting Palestinian kids not to be killed, essentially. And then this Israeli couple came up to me and started saying things about how like, "Well, don't you think it's wrong that like they're like they, meaning Palestinians, which is not full like really accurate, are like killing kids?" And I was just like, statistically speaking, most Palestinians are getting slaughtered, and I don't really think there's the same level of like discrepancy there. But to talk about that is so difficult, especially in like digital space, because anything can be taken out of context. So one of the things that I think makes it easier to talk about sensitive subjects, and why I've kind of shied away from a lot of digital events lately, is being in person, because being away from phones, being away from cameras, being away from things like that, because it allows you to really be present in the space, to talk fully, to talk without worrying about sound bites, and to just really get at the root of conversation. I think a lot of times, because of social media, kind of what I said in the video, we're so caught up in like saying the hot take or saying the cool thing or saying the thing that's going to likes. And I'm much more interested in just like seeing like, I understand where you're coming from. Like, I understand, for example, like I understand how, for example, Israel was founded, but I also can be critical of the way in which apartheid has been born out of those fears that allowed it to exist in the first place, in the way that it does. And so I think those are very difficult things to say and talk about, especially when people have more underlying agendas and motives. But at the end of the day, I don't want people to be safe. I want people to be liberated. I want people to be secure, and feeling like they can express themselves, and also not just express themselves, but like eat and like dance and laugh and be free. And I think remembering that is worth whatever kind of backlash one faces for sensitivity. But I'm also lucky. You know, I have a full-time job. I have that I don't think fully knows that I am a poet, and I also don't want them to know. So I play this like game of like letting certain people know who I am and where I am when. But you know, it is what it is. So.
Thank you so much for answering that. We're gonna move on in just a second, but I just want to say that question was from Solomon. Thank you to Solomon for that very thoughtful question and Tariq's really thoughtful response. Let's get one more question from Anne, who is here enjoying the salon, who asks, have you ever considered collaborating with a visual artist or a musical artist or a film artist to create a synergy between your poetry and other art forms?
Yes, the short answer is yes. I think back in college, I wanted to work with a dance troupe to try to like have poetry be told physically. Recently, I reached out to a sculptor to feel like if there's a way to like embed poetry and stories into like the work of like of a jar, the work of like different kinds of vases and things like that. But also like I'm trying to find like new ways to create with somebody, right? I think a lot of times like poetry collaborations or literary arts collaborations can feel a little sloppy. It's like, oh, let's just slap this like cool line on a shirt or a poster. And I'm actually really interested these days, and that goes back to the movement of like, what would it take to work with a sculptor or work with a dance troupe, like from the jump, like both of you have nothing prepared and you're creating together. So that way, like the work you're doing is in sync, as opposed to, oh, I'm writing the script that you work to, that you dance to, or I'm writing the script that you just plaster onto the things you already have. So I want to find more authentic ways to engage with other forms. But so far, I think the way that I've done so is, the repurposing of poetry that I've made in the past. And I think submitting it to, like, I remember there was a dance troupe in, I think, Oklahoma that had accepted a love poem of mine that I'd written. But the pandemic stopped that from happening. But that was the thing where I submitted a piece. I think that we're going to create something out of it. I would love to be in spaces where it's like, we're just starting from scratch and seeing what we can riff off of.
I think everyone here would look forward to such a collaboration. So we're excited to see what you do. Tariq Lublin, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us.
Thank you, Ron. Appreciate it.
And thank you to the questions from everybody in the chat. Don't be shy with your questions. We will definitely find the time to get them answered. We have another artist for you. I'm very excited to welcome Jasmine Parks to the stage. Hello.
Hey, Ryan. Hey, everyone in the room. Thank you so much for bringing your energy into the space. I'm so excited about tonight, and I really appreciated hearing about more of your practices, Tariq. I know I've been around like years as you developed as an artist as well. So getting to hear you dig a little deeper about why you write and the reason behind of like your action, not just putting words out there, but your action as an organizer, I think was very refreshing. So I appreciate that.
Love all this love that is going on here. Jasmine, wonderful way to introduce yourself. Another great way to introduce yourself is to check out this video that you made. I know we're going to learn a little bit more about you and get to hear you perform a poem in this video. So let's go ahead and check that out, and then we'll ask you some questions after this video.
Sounds perfect. Thank you.
Healing begins where the wound was made. This is an exploration of healing through poetry. What happens in a home doesn't always stay in a home. It travels to the blood and spills out into the world.
To the aquarium that charged a $40 admission fee. If I wanted to pay that much, just to see a creature trapped in captivity, I fill up my own tank and visit my brother in prison. I'd recount our family history, a middle passage drowning in the genetic pool. I track both of my brothers, the one in prison and the other dead. I track my sister's 5 children, each beautiful, black, and smooth inside of the foster care system. They are an oil spill that no one takes accountability for. I track all of my family, the living, the dead, and even the bastards, lucky enough to never have learned of the thickness of our blood, the way that it lays in wait to claim us. I track it back only as far as my great-grandfather, a blue-eyed black man, said to have had an angry tempest for eyes and a hatred of his children, including my grandfather, an alcoholic who placed everything unhealed in his capsized liver and in the bloodied bludgeoning of my grandmother's gun emptied. And an ocean of death sprawled across my grandfather's face, washed over each of their children. My mother submerged her traumas beneath her addiction, birthed each of her children into this world just as wet with grief. They say that blood is thicker than water. It's probably why so many of us drown, and why I find it hard on most days just to stay afloat. So maybe, just maybe, that $40 will be best used in teaching my daughter to swim. The poem Aquarium took approximately 5 years to write. This poem required me to live, research, and gather as many of my family experiences as possible. And you're probably like, well, isn't that information that's readily available? Well, it wasn't, for a few different reasons. First and foremost, I'm adopted. Though by my maternal side, I didn't learn anything of that side of the family until I was 11. That's when I first learned who my mother was, received her name, found out that she was in prison since I was 3 months old. 2, because of the violent nature that split the family up when my grandmother murdered my grandfather, there wasn't any further communication, and there was a shutdown of tapping into emotions, of communicating what happened, because it was such a traumatic and tragic event. In addition to that, there's an adage within the Black community for our households, and it may be in other cultures as well, but what happens in the house stays in the house, meaning that you do not discuss family business of any type of pain, of any type of abuse, of any type of mistreatment, to walk outside of the threshold of where you live. The thing is that I always found peculiar or ironic about that is that you're still going to carry all of that baggage, all of that weight. It's hard to let go. It lives inside of you. You know, it nestles inside of this new home that's in your body, that's in your mind, that's in your spirit. And even when I was younger, I questioned a lot of things, which got me in trouble. Even though I was adopted, I shifted between different households quite a bit. And I guess that's what always made me think about, what does home mean? What does family mean? What does it feel like? What does it smell like? What does it look like? What does it taste like? Things of that nature. And to really heal from something, Alice Walker has a quote that healing begins where the wound was made. And it's so important to go and look at the beginning, the genesis of an experience and how it snowballed, right? For me, I could only go back as far, and this really disheartened me, but my great-grandfather, so my mother's grandfather. And that's because of the Great Migration and institutionalized racism that really broke up families that were from the South, that had ancestral
lineage in slavery, and many families were split apart. Many families stopped talking to each other even after they migrated, trying to escape racism, but running into it in a different form up north, but trying to make a better life for themselves and for their families at that point of time. I've done the ancestry.com. It's really difficult to find more information past that point. So I'm trying my best to dig a little further. But for the sake of this writing and what I learned at the time of this piece is as far as my great-grandfather. And thinking about him migrating from Tennessee and coming to Black Bottom and raising a family, but doing it with a lot of anger as a Black man, possibly of mixed race, and kind of the havoc that was wrought upon his wife and his children, and what that would have looked like for my grandfather being raised in that home and carrying that with him. Again, thinking that what happens in his house stays in his house, but you take it and you raise another family with it. And the next generation, we have my mother. My mother, out of my grandparents' 6 children, was the only child to end up in foster care, and no one wants to talk about why. Still don't know the reason fully why now. It's a conversation that once it's brought up, it's immediately shut down. And with that, my mother carried that baggage with her. She also transitioned between many different foster homes. And that showed up in not being able to raise her children. And my sister wasn't able to raise, 5 of her 7 children, which is also very sad, and it breaks my heart. But which brings me to the point of writing this poem is about breaking cycles. Is looking at my family and seeing their legacy of strength, seeing their legacy of surviving, and really thinking about that we can have a wealth of being able to thrive and pass it down to the next generation. I look at my family and I'm thankful. I'm thankful for how far they come and how far we still have to go and what my children's futures will be. So for this, I challenge you to look at your roots. I pray that they grow into the ground healthy and that you grow in strength from where you are. Thank you. Healing is possible. Everything that you need is inside of yourself. Trust you in this journey. Love, Jazz.
Wow. I think you just floored the whole chat, the whole salon. That was really, really incredible, Jasmine. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. Again, anyone with questions, feel free to put them in the chat. We will definitely get them mixed into the conversation. I have to point something out. It's incredible how that poem starts, because it starts in, you do not know where that poem is going to go in those first couple of lines. And there's a little bit of humor there, right? It gets you into it. You're like, where is this going to go? This conversational argument that's happening about an admission to an aquarium, right? And then obviously we see the depths of what you're talking about and where it goes. But I really enjoyed how you got us into something so much larger than where you started. I'm curious, how intentional was that to try to grab people with something unexpected and then take them on what ends up becoming such a personal journey in that poem?
That's a really good question, Ryan. It was very intentional. As I said before, it took me 5 years to write it, and I did not know the entry point initially of how I wanted to talk about my family and the trauma brought upon us, but also what healing looks like, until I went to a national poetry slam in, I believe it was 2015. And I was hanging out with some poets and we were about to go to an aquarium before the slam had started. And I remember the admission price almost being $40. And I was just like, damn, that's a lot of money to get into somewhere where these creatures are held captive. And if I wanted to go do that, I would go like literally fill up my tank and go see my brother. And that's exactly what I said. And that had I started mauling and chewing on that like over and over and what that felt like and what that meant. Because to me, even though like my daughter is really big into like learning about animals, learning about different creatures like dinosaurs and things. So she really loves zoos and she loves aquariums. And I love learning about these animals, but at the same time, when I go into these spaces, sometimes I feel very uncomfortable because they are creatures that are being held captive. No matter how much they're being taken care of, they're still being held captive. And it got me to thinking about how much of my family have been swallowed by the system. And it made me think about the transatlantic slave trade. It made me think about like, in the Black community, we talk about how we were the ones that survived from coming over here. Like some people that gave up their lives, like throwing themselves overboard and things of that nature. And I just think about like, okay, what about the blood that still like went on and what did that feel like? So, and thinking about that aquarium, it kind of opened up the conversation for me. I love to pull people in by like a natural conversation, like we kicking it, like it's just me and you in the living room, and like, let me tell you about this, beep, right? And we kind of just start like unpacking, because essentially when you are kicking it with your friends that you trust, or like someone that you love, like a companion or like a family member that you feel very comfortable with, sometimes conversations you start digging a little bit deeper. And the layering, pulling back the layering, is like, you know, we started here from this window of talking about this aquarium, but then you move forward and saying like, what does it mean that your brother has been held captive? And how did this come to be? And how did your nieces and your nephews end up in the system as a third generation? And how far can you trace back these roots? And why is it that you can only trace back your roots this far? Like, you know, it becomes more of a, you know, it's like this big equation on the board that you're trying to solve and you're trying to figure out, but you ain't really got all the answers. Like you ain't got the answers, Sway. And sometimes it's frustrating, but you still feel like the need to figure out like, what is this root? How do we heal from this? How do we figure out like how to move forward? Do we have to redo this problem and something else? Is the problem just the problem? And maybe it's not for us to understand all of the pieces of it. Is it just for us to say like, okay, I'm going to take part of this and then I'm going to build upon it? So for me, the intentionality after having that conversation and that experience, when sitting down writing the poem after trying to write the poem for 5 years and finding out more information about my family, it was very, very intentional.
I'm really love that we have Tariq and you on this same salon, because there are so many similarities. You know, you just brought up another one with that conversational aspect. Tariq was talking about really talking out his poems, you know, being in a space where, and I think that's where a lot of the power for both of you as poets is coming from, because you are writing like you talk, you know, and that can connect with people on a much deeper level. You shared so much of yourself in Aquarium. It's such a vulnerable space to be, to perform that, to write that. And I think it's always important talking to artists of all kinds about that vulnerability and how that's not easy to do in everyday life, let alone through your artwork. Talk about getting to a place where not only having to do this research with your family and understand that, but then that second stage of sharing it and being vulnerable with others to bring them into your story.
I think actually where it starts is learning how to be vulnerable with yourself. There are 3 principles that are very important for me, which is authenticity, transparency, and vulnerability. And I feel like it has to start with you. And because if it doesn't, when you're getting up to tell a story, it's going to be skewed. Of course, we already have natural bias. We want to make ourselves look like in the best light and things of that nature. But what it becomes is, what is this story that I'm trying to tell without like a slanted angle, where it's actually healing? And it started with the conversations that I was having with myself that was very cathartic. I spent a lot of my life going through therapy, like when I was younger, and typically that's taboo within the Black community. But I did have a lot of challenges because of my upbringing that made it necessary for me to talk to someone. But it didn't become, I guess, a space for me to fully open until like a couple of years ago, where I felt like, okay, I'm gonna be honest, I'm not about to be trying to present my best self in here because I don't want them to think I'm crazy or nothing like that. Where it becomes like, okay, let's actually get down. Let's dig into like this dirt. Let's go through it. And also let's challenge yourself, because you're not perfect and you're also not a victim. We're going to move past this victimhood and what that looks like. And I just felt like before like I touch a stage, I always it's almost like a physical sick, like I want to throw up and things, because I feel as though no matter how many stages I touch, no matter how many interviews I do, no matter how many classes I teach, because I feel like the weight of words is a very huge responsibility. Being a storyteller, being a griot is very important. You just can't get up there just saying like whatever because you have this platform. And what are you doing with this platform? For me, like I had to take a step back even from social media. We were talking about this before everyone came into the room. And I haven't been on there since like October or November of 2020, because like Tariq said, I had to root myself in the present, but at the same time, you tell a snapshot of like who you are. And I just feel like I don't like to have surface conversations. I like to dig. I like to dig deep. For me, that's very important. And maybe because I'm named after a flower and I'm thinking about where these roots are going and things of that nature. But for me, it's very important that I got to be real with myself before I'm real with anybody else. And having such impactful, powerful conversations, I can't get up there if I'm not doing the work. Like, I got to be careful because people are going to come up to me and they're going to want to talk. They're going to want to expand the conversation. So I was like, I got to get myself together and I got to be real about where I am. I'm not a therapist or anything like that. But what I do is a lot of work along the journey. And for me, it's very vital because I feel like the power of being an empath, and I feel like couple that with being a writer and also being a performer, you have the ability to time travel. And for me, I get to go, even though I'm rooted in the present, I get to go back and tell young Jazz, you're going to be good. Like, you're going to be okay. Like, and I get to flash forward to the future and get to see, like, I am okay. I am good. I'm going to continue building like where I'm from, but also extending that healing to other people. I have to be vulnerable if healing is made accessible to other people. Like, I cannot clam myself up. So because there were so many things that were happening between the different households that I was shuffled between, and I could not talk about it, and I could read so much. Like I was on punishment a lot, but I read myself into new worlds, even like reading something as simple as like Goosebumps, right? It talk about fears, or like Stephen King, you talk about these fears and things like that. Those weren't the things that I feared in my life. I escaped into those books to experience different type of fears outside of like abuses, outside of silencing, outside of erasure, things of that nature. So for me, I would never stifle that young girl that I was. I'm giving her room to be her truest self. I'm giving her room to heal. I'm giving her room to write herself into a new world, which even the Kresge has allowed me to do. Like, I also identified with Tariq when he was saying like, oh, I ain't wrote a poem in a couple of years. Because I'd be real, I feel like you need to live experience. I feel like you don't need to just say whatever you feel is the hottest thing. You don't need to jump on a topic and hurry up and submit it to a publisher because you feel like, oh, it's going to be hot and it's going to be that sound bite. I feel like it needs to be something that is truly experienced, that you have a real thought attached to it and what you want to see as the outcome. For me, I write to heal. I write to extend healing to other people. I write to challenge. I write to be challenged.
Anne in the chat said, this is less of a question, more of a comment. Everyone experiences generational trauma. You have shown us how to begin working with this. And that goes along with what you talked about in the video, that idea of healing for you personally, of healing through poetry, through therapy. But I'm curious, have you heard from others that your poetry may have helped them sort through and understand their own generational trauma, their own issues that they may be going through? What's some of the feedback that you've gotten from your work and how it's affected other people?
I typically do have people come up to me like after a performance or after like intimate conversations about like my work, and we have dialogue about how they had similar experiences, whether it be generational trauma, even if it's not the same type of trauma. Typically within the first community you experience is your family. And that is where some of the first hurt that you experience within the world occurs as well, including your definition of what love is, including what healing looks like, and your identity of who you are and your identity of what family is and so forth. So that's always the gateway to say, hey, I've experienced this and da-da-da, and how have you overcome this? Or how can you get up and talk about this? Or, my first feature, it wasn't at like an open mic. It was at Take Back the Night, which is a program that highlights sexual assault within the month of October, and which is Domestic Violence Month, right? And for me, it was always women coming up to me and us having the conversations. And I think one of the most impactful conversations that I had was not even just with a woman, was with a man that came up to me and had a conversation about my openness, about my vulnerability. And sometimes male or male identified people don't have that, don't feel like they can trust where they can share that type of narrative. Because you hear about it happening more with female identifying folks, right? And the conversation that we had, and that it was healing to hear my story. Things like that definitely touched me, even from like work that I've done before. Like I worked at a women's clinic that performed abortions, which to some people, they don't believe in that. For me, as a woman and as a mother, you cannot tell someone when they are prepared to mother. That woman in there is making their decisions, and the conversations that we used to have would always be like, I'm coming from a place of love. You are making the best decision that you know how to make. Like for me, I'm adopted. Probably wasn't the best decision for me to go through the different homes that I went to at the time, even though they brought me to this point. I'm very thankful. It took me a long journey to get there. But some women, they cannot think about that situation, or bringing another child into this world that they know that they are not ready to take care of. And I would have conversations with those women, and I would see them on the street at festivals and bars, things like that. They would come up to me, give me hugs and stuff like that. They were like, just thank you just for being first and foremost down to earth, not making it seem like it was the heaviest choice that I had to make, or that I was making the best choice within my circumstance. So it's not just what's being said on stage. Sometimes it happens behind closed doors. And sometimes it's those really intimate conversations that maybe you feel like you're only going to see me for this finite amount of time, and you can share things that you have not been able to share with other people, right? It becomes like, okay, this is a diary that no one else will be able to read, but it's able to talk back to me, and we can start to unpack. And for me, those dialogues are so healing, even for me to hear. It's not just, it's a reciprocal process. It's not just, oh, wow, I'm offering you healing. There you go. I'm like, what am I, the Messiah in this piece? It's not like that. It's not like that. It's an exchange, which I really appreciate. And it comes from different like groups of people, but it's always that entry rate of talking about trauma and talking about how to dispel that trauma and how to disrupt those cycles to live the best life that you want. It's not going to be a perfect life. Like I don't live a perfect life, but I'm very blessed. Like I'm not religious, but I know I'm blessed. Like I know I'm covered, and to have made it this far. And I'm so thankful for all the people I touch, but also all the people who have touched me as well.
Excellent response. A lot of people calling this medicine tonight and really appreciating the work that you've done. I just see another question here. Let me see. Something about writing a book. Here we go. From Marcia. It was a beautiful work and beautiful talk. I identify having come from an alcoholic home. You have inspired my further work. Have you thought about writing a children's book?
Oh, Marsha, that's a really great question. And I'm going to give you a really real answer. There is something inside of me that is afraid to write a book. I keep trying. I really keep trying, but there's a fear of something about getting words down on a page and just sending it out to the world as opposed to speaking it in performances. And I'm really trying to move beyond that fear. Like, I know it's something rooted within my childhood about rejection. It's something rooted in my childhood about you can't do this, girl, you ain't enough. And I'm really trying to like break down those walls. I'm very interested in translating my work to graphic novels and also what that does look like in the visual world as well. Like my filmmaker, I can't wait for y'all to see my film. That director was on point, okay? Brought one of my poems to life where I was just like, I would love to do more of this work. A children's book has always been like, I would love to see what that is because I don't want to confine myself to just saying that I'm a poet. Like, I'm a writer. Like, there are stories that are living inside of me. And I understand about myself that I have to really move past that fear. Maybe I just need a mentor to just drag it on out of me, to be like, girl, we breaking down these walls. We finna do this. And this is what it's going to be because your words need to be out here being read. So, that's what I'm looking forward to it. So hopefully one day.
My vote right now, I would love to see a graphic novel. I think everybody here is with me on that. I think it would translate wonderfully. Was part of the fellowship, was part of that, potentially using that money or that opportunity to experiment in different mediums? I mean, what did that mean to you and what came to mind of how that's going to help you as an artist?
So first and foremost, I want to go back like a few years ago. And I was doing the Motown poetry competition. And I didn't get in with the regular poets, but I got like a second call in for like a mini competition that they were doing like during the intermission and whatnot. And I brought poem and I did my poem and it was like, oh yeah. And someone else was there, another artist was there, they were more of a rapper and it was like, oh yeah. So we had tie and it was like, it's a tiebreaker. And I was not prepared. And I was just like, so of course I didn't win it and whatnot. And I remember I was just so dejected at the time, right? So afterwards, I run into a friend and anybody within the artist community, if you have met this lovely spirit and energy, I am telling you, LaShawn Phoenix Moore is bomb.com to feed it into your soul. And I had met LaShawn before and I was like, you gonna be my friend. You don't know you're gonna be my friend. It took us some years, but I told her she was gonna be my friend, right? But at that point in time, we hadn't developed a friendship, but she would always sew into me. Every time I seen her with some beautiful words. And she told me, she was like, maybe you aren't meant to win a competition of like $250. Maybe you're meant to win a Kresge. And at that point in time, I didn't believe that my work was strong enough to even think about applying for like a fellowship, let alone a Kresge in itself. And I became so scared. I'm just like, I'm so scared to apply. I'm so scared. And this was my first time actually applying to the Kresge. And I actually broke myself open. I was like, I'm just gonna open myself up. I'm really thinking about this whole journey. I'm gonna be very honest about it. And if anything, if I don't get it, what it does, the application does make you really say, this is my art and this is my practice and this is why I do what I do. It makes you like dot all the I's, cross all the T's. You ain't just writing, you ain't just performing for nothing. They make you go into like detail about it. And for me, what the Kresge has allowed is not just the practice of like writing, because I'm writing some poems or I'm writing whatever I'm writing and it's just coming out like, okay, this ain't that fire stuff. It's probably starting off as a smoldering, right? But what it did do is allow me to buy my first home. And for me, it's like I'm getting choked up because it's very important. I dealt with housing instability for a lot of my life. And going back again, talking to young Jazz, like, you're going to be okay. You're not going to be living out of garbage bags. You're not going to be like shuffling between these households and nobody wants you. Like, you get to build your own like family and have somewhere to house them and grow in love together. Like, my children will always have a home to come to, not rent it, but this is like, you know what I'm saying? So for me, that's vital, because how can I create if I'm not secure in like my housing situation? How can I create if I'm not secure, and can I take care of my family properly by speaking my truths, by, you know, writing, by living in my imagination? Like, who's to say you getting paid to live out your imagination? Like, and what world is that? And it's my world, and I'm so thankful for it. So for me, the Kresge has definitely helped break cycles and start a legacy for not only myself, but for my children and future generations that I'm very, very thankful for.
You know, trying to find this in the chat, I keep getting a little lost in here. But Judy Bauman, who is also a Kresge Fellow, I believe, had a question, and you know, she wasn't sure if this was the best place to ask it, but I think we're in a vulnerable place. I think it is a great question. I think you'd be okay answering this. You do have so much background as an educator and working with kids. She asked, you know, what would be your advice, or what would you say to a child who's been adopted, you know, how to be your authentic self? How would you talk to them about that?
First and foremost, it depends on the individual child, because every child is different. Every person has an individualized experience. But if I was to give some generalized like advice, one, I would tell them my story, which is unique in itself, right? You know, you grow up, and again, I'm going back to the Black community, you hear so much about the absent father, but you don't really hear about that narrative of the absent mother. And there was a piece inside of me that felt like something was wrong because I didn't have my mother in my life. I didn't have that nurturing component. Like, I don't know, something was embedded that it's okay for a man not to be present, but for your mother not to be there, like, things may not work out for the best. But to tell them that it's not about waiting for someone to come to save you. It's about taking every opportunity that you can, even if they're small, and like a teacher may be like taking you under their wing and saying like, you know what? I see that you got some smarts on you, and I'm going to give you an extra assignment. And it may sound lame because the social studies teacher did that to me, but I was just like, oh, you see me as intelligent. I didn't get acknowledged for that when I was younger. Or as big as maybe there's a household that might just be a stop. It may not be your permanent home, but it may be the pause in your life that you need to say like, I'm safe. I can sit alone with my thoughts. I can sit alone and actually just not think about, is something going to come and hurt me, whether it's mentally, whether it's emotionally, whether it's spiritually or physically. Like, this is a pause for me to get fresh air, or to just be like, instead of saying like, again, there's someone that's going to come save you, maybe it's yourself. Like, that is the biggest thing, that there's so much power in you, inside of you, that sometimes people would like to take and crush. And some adults, they say things to a child that has nothing to do with that child at all. It has many things to do with that adult not healing, and they are projecting on a child. And that specifically is their baggage, and it doesn't have nothing to do with you. It's trying to spill over into your life, but you can't take it personal, even if it feel like they directing it towards you, because you still get to dictate the type of life that you want to have and the type of person that you're going to be. Like, in childhood, in preschool, in kindergarten. They give you a crayon, they give you a page, they give you stories, and they say, what can you put on this page? What can you create? And that's the same thing in life. It's, what can I put inside myself? What can I put into this world? No matter what you've been through. I did a lot of things that I'm just like, I thought that I would grow up to be a woman broken. And I'm not. I'm like the Japanese bowl with the gold and things like that has had all of these healings to these wounds and things like that. And I'm so thankful, because if I would have listened to what a lot of adults told me, I would have stayed in that kind of thinking. Like, I had to break that thinking. And that's the biggest thing, is the power to hope and the power to think. They cannot take your mind. They cannot take your thoughts. They would try to. And sometimes you believe those lies and they'll become embedded. But what happens is that you have to retrain your thinking. You have to fill it with things that you want to be true about you, even if it's not true in the moment, because you have the power to create the person that you would like to be.
Really, really powerful. That's well, is just, yeah, I'm taking my moment to process everything there. I do want to put one more call out to anyone that may have a question. Anne is asking, how do you break that thinking? Is there a little bit of quick advice? I know you mentioned therapy, obviously poetry, being creative, finding a creative outlet. I'm sure some of those things. Is there anything else that you would want to share?
There's energy attached to words, even if it's inside of your mind before it's spoken aloud. And what I would say is, I know it sounds lame, it sounds corny, but positive affirmations, literally writing what you want to be true. Even they say fake it till you make it, but it's not faking it. It's what you want to be true for yourself. Like, I had to start writing out on sticky notes and putting them like in my house, like, I am enough. I belong in every room that I walk into. And then shortening that and saying that I just belong, things that you want to be true and you're calling into fruition. Like, my last couple of years, instead of doing a New Year's resolution, because they was gonna get broke. I ain't doing no diet, I ain't exercising, nothing like that. But to better myself, I come up with a theme. 2020 was the year of vision coming into perspective. 2021 was about 2019 was the year to lean in. 2020 was the year of vision coming into perspective. 2021 was about what was 20? It all blurred together. But it was about something about growth, something like that, right? But this year is about prosperity, and not just financially. It's about how can I enrich in my life. So it's really saying, like, maybe it's you coming up with a theme and trying to comb out those themes throughout the year and saying, like, this is how I'm leaning in. This is how I'm enriching my life. This is how I'm widening my purpose or whatnot. Or maybe these are some affirmations that I'm seeing and I'm just saying over and over again, I'm enough, I'm enough, I'm enough, to break down the walls of imposter syndrome.
Christina wrote, the themes of family and home, both emotional and physical, are coming through so clearly in tonight's conversations. Tariq, will bring you back in. She's curious to know how Jasmine's words are landing for you.
Sorry, I had to unmute myself. I mean, they hit home. I mean, they're definitely things where it's like I was watching Jasmine like speak, and I was like, oh yeah, I remember from that feature she did like a couple years ago, and from like the times I've seen her perform in slams and stuff. So for me, it's like, it's interesting to like watch us talk about work outside of poems. Like, I think a lot of times we share these narratives through like the imagery laced experiences we have through the storytelling, but it's nice to kind of have more than 3 minutes to hear somebody speak, more than the 10-minute, 15-minute features to talk about the work. And so, I mean, it hits home for me because I think, while people look at my work, and this is kind of why I wanted to get more within what's in my reach conversation. I think a lot of people look at my work and they're like, oh, you just write about Palestine. You just write about like global movements or diaspora. And I was like, no, like I write about those through the lens of my family. Like the poem about my mother and picking mint leaves is as much about like Palestinian boys and girls being killed as it is about like the act of returning home to literally give my mother a mint leaf to put in her coffee, her tea for the day. And so like, there are so many ways in which like these micro these micro experiences serve as lenses for macro experiences that I think like Jasmine and I are both speaking to.
Absolutely. I want to get one more question here. Tori would love to know any favorite books from both of you. If there's something recent, could be another book of poetry. What are some books that are striking you right now, Tariq?
I mean, some of my favorite books of poetry, like of all time, I like The January Children by Safi Al-Hillo. I loved the book Hum, not Hum, actually it might be Hum, by Jamal May, a local Detroit poet. But like there are so many things. Like I also grew up reading anthologies of poetry, so like I never really knew the books they came from. But like I loved Khalil Gibran's The Prophet. I remember. I mean, I used to read a lot of I used to watch a lot of anime and also read a lot of comics. So I think any books that kind of I'm trying to think what else there's somebody. Oh, Rumi. I've been reading a lot of Rumi lately, but not Coleman Barks translations. Coleman Barks doesn't actually know Persian. Don't read Coleman Barks. Read the actual translation from an actual Persian translator. I don't remember his name, but I've been reading the Mesnavi from Rumi in the original way it was intended to be written and heard. So that's been really powerful and really beautiful for me. And that's another thing, trying to read poets that don't necessarily speak your language. And that show also has been really interesting because I've been thinking a lot about ways to like understand the gap in translation and like what is lost. I mean, there's so many poets that I was assigned when I was in the MFA from C. Dale, for example. And I was like, this poem isn't really hitting the way I thought it would, but I'm gonna try to appreciate what beauty is in it, knowing that the American language can't capture, the English language, can't capture what this was originally written as. So a lot of anthologies, a lot of like Oscar Luis, Neruda, a lot of Octavio Paz, things like that. So I could ramble, so I'm gonna stop.
I appreciate you sharing those. Thank you very much. Jasmine, any book recommendations before we shut down the shop for the night?
Yeah, absolutely. As far as poetry, I love me some Danae Smith. I love me some Hanif Abdurraqib. I love me some Angel Nafis. Like, they are bomb.com. Outside of poetry, I'm a big Alice Walker fan, like huge Alice Walker fan. I think The Color Purple just allowed me to say that I could be vulnerable, that I could talk about things that typically were not talked about within the household. Octavia Butler showed me Afrofuturism, where I was, that's about world and creating. That's like bomb.com, which I really appreciate. And right now I'm reading Isabel Wilkerson, 2 books. I'm reading Caste, and Caste is talking about how in America, how Black people and people of color experience a caste system that's similar to the one in India, and also the one that was experienced through the Holocaust against the Jewish people. And then also The Warmth of Other Suns, which is talking about the Great Migration of, the Great Migration of Southern Blacks, either westward or coming up north, and what that experience was like. And I'm thinking a lot about how that archival and historical process ties into my own family history. So those are things that I definitely recommend, like artists that you recommend, blackity, blackity, black, 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 because growing up, I just wasn't exposed to as many Black artists, and they are all bomb.com.
Absolutely. There's an incredible passage from Richard Wright in the beginning of The Warmth of Other Suns that I think is one of my favorite pieces of poetry. So if anyone does check that out, be sure to enjoy it. This, I think, has really been an incredible conversation. I hope everyone that attended enjoyed it as much as I did. And thank you to everyone that attended and filled up that chat with so much love and so many great questions. It was so active, and I love to see that little community that we built during this salon. I know a lot of people want to keep connecting, find out more about the 2 poets, artists that we talked to today, and that's going to be in the chat. So be sure to check that out. Tariq and Jasmine, thank you so much for an incredible, heavy, funny, sweet, insightful conversation today. I really hope everyone here enjoyed themselves, and you can continue to connect with them. Please do check that chat to find out more information. If you want to rewatch this or share this program, we would love for you to share it out there and let people know about this experience. It's going to be posted at Kresge Arts website, I believe. Kresge Arts in Detroit presents in the next couple of days. And we're going to be doing a lot of these. This is the first of 9. The next one is going to be on Wednesday, February 16th at 6 o'clock with Cinnamon Triano, Graham White, and Sabrina Nelson, who was very active in the chat tonight. Thanks for coming through, Sabrina. You can learn more about that, and you can register for the salon using the link in the chat. Thank you again to everybody on behalf of Kresge Arts in Detroit, and of course WDET, for making today's salon a really, it exceeded my expectations quite a bit. So thank you so much to Tariq and Jasmine. That was really incredible. Thank you again to everyone that attended. Come to the next one, and the next one, and the next one, and the next one. So thank you, everybody, for coming. Jasmine, Tariq, thank you so much.
Peace.
Have a good night, guys.